I'm Effie and this is What Effie Reads.
I was lost but you helped me find my way, tainted by a desire, cause I was scared to face the truth. You pulled me out from my anxiety.
Today I'm going to be filming the end of year reading survey, highly inspired by Kayla over at Books and Lala's video, and also inspired by a blog post that I will link in the description down below. So today is going to be filled with arbitrary decisions. One, I'm filming in front of the Christmas tree because it is going down tonight and I feel like it needs just a little bit more love because it's only been up since Christmas Day. The other arbitrary decision that I've made is that I've decided not to use the same book twice. Now, what this might mean is that the answers to questions may not be the very best, but I think it keeps it interesting. Considering how many books I read last year, it feels like it makes sense for me to pick a different book for the answer to each question. Does it actually make sense? I don't know, but I suppose we should get started. The first question is favourite 2021 release, and that would be True Crime Story by Joseph Knox. This follows a couple of writers 10 years after the disappearance of Zoe Nolan from her university halls of residence, as they carry out interviews with those that knew her best and try and piece together what happened to her. I found it thoroughly engaging from start to finish, and the ending came as quite a surprise to me, but it was one of those that when you look back you go, oh, that's really smart. So highly recommend picking up this book if you haven't already. I've been seeing an alternative copy around recently, so I think if it's not already out in the US, it is coming out very soon, but it came out in the UK, I want to say June or July time last year. The second question is favourite older release that you read in 2021, and that would be Peter Darling by Austen Chant. It is a queer retelling of Peter Pan, and in this book Peter Pan is actually a trans man, and it just all around really enjoyable book. Hit some really hard issues and touched on them very well. I will say content warning for dead naming. It is relevant to the plot, but if you are someone that is sensitive to dead naming in books, this book is not going to be the one for you. Next question is a book that lived up to the hype, and for me that's going to be the Tea Dragon books. So we've got Tea Dragon Society, Tea Dragon Festival and Tea Dragon Tapestry. They are such a warm, comforting set of books. I managed to read them on my Kindle. At the time that I read them, they were available on Kindle Unlimited. I know the catalogue changes constantly, so I don't know if that's still the case. But I did recently see a copy of it physically in Waterstones. And I think if you have the means to buy these physically, the digital edition just do not do justice to how beautiful these books are. Basically, you've got these dragons that they grow leaves, and some of them you can use horns and flowers, that kind of thing, to brew a tea. And they have these really deep connections with their caretakers, and they're able to share the memories that they've created with their caretakers. So it's just such a sweet series of books, and all three of them are queer, and I just highly recommend them. A book that didn't live up to the hype would be 100% The Midnight Library. I absolutely detested this book. I found it really trite. I found it a really overdone concept, and obviously this is a very well-loved book, but I just don't see it. And you know, if this is a book you love, fantastic, it clearly did something for you, but for me it did the opposite of what I would hope, and I just don't think it lived up to the hype that it has. The next question is biggest reading achievement of 2021. And for me, that would be finally finishing War and Peace. It's a really weird one for me because, one, it's a lot better than I thought it would be. Having now read it, I feel a bit silly about feeling so intimidated by it. Like, yes, it is an incredibly chunky book. I think this edition's about 1,300 pages, maybe closer to 1,400. But the story is really interesting. There is a large cast of characters, so at times it can be a little bit difficult to figure out who's who. But I found the story just very engaging. I can't really explain what it's about. It's a little bit about society, it's a little bit about war, and it's a little bit about philosophy. And that's kind of the point, that Tolstoy wasn't trying to be a specific genre with this book. He was just doing what he felt like. And I've got respect for that. In terms of how I actually read this book, like obviously I've got this beautiful physical edition, but I also combined it with listening to the new narration that Audible have produced with Thunderway Newton, and I highly recommend that. Her narration is fantastic. She has really distinct voices for each of the characters, and it's just a thoroughly enjoyable listen. The next question is favourite character, and I found this one a little bit difficult because I've had a lot of favourite characters this year, but in the end I decided to go for Mosscap from A Song for the Wild Bill. A Song for the Wild Bill by Becky Chambers. Mosscap is the robot that you meet in this book, and we're following sibling Dexter, a monk, as they go out into the world as a tea monk, and they come across Mosscap, a robot who has been given the mission of finding out what humans need. It's a really comforting book. There's not a terrible amount of plot. It is a very character-driven book, but it just gave me the warm fuzzies, which is something you really love in a book. And for least favourite character, I've decided to go for Tamlin from the ACOTAR series. I actually think that I'm holding up the wrong book. And I won't go into spoilers. There'll be no spoilers in this video. But I will say that if you know, you know, and Tamlin in book 1, yes, every time I reread it, Tamlin's a yes for me. And then I get on to book 2 and Tamlin very quickly, I think within the space of the first chapter, becomes a no for me. And certain decisions that he makes me hate him every time I reread book 2. And then I'll go back and reread book 1 and fall in love with him all over again. The next question is most surprising moment, and that would come in Iron Widow by Joanne J. Zhao. Again, no spoilers in this video. However, I will say it's to do with the actions of the protag, and I thoroughly appreciate the way that this story goes. I also think this book has an absolutely killer ending, and I'm excited to hear other people talk about that ending because I've heard it can be interpreted multiple ways. For favourite writing of the year, I've gone for Vicious by V. Schwab. Honestly, every time I pick up a V. Schwab book, I am blown away by how beautiful her writing is. The fact that I've chosen Vicious is very arbitrary because I also read the Cassidy Blake trilogy this year and I really enjoyed them as well, and her writing was exceptional in them. But there's just something about this book, probably because aside from Extraordinary, which is a graphic novel, and I don't like, Extraordinary was a 5-star as well, but I'm not sure it showcases her beautiful writing as much. But in Vicious, there's this quote which I will not remember verbatim, but it's something along the lines of, like, you never know when your life's going to change. It'll be the moment between 2 breaths and it will change everything, or something like that. And words can't truly convey how beautiful V. Schwab's writing is. And I do very much recommend this book. I have yet to read the sequel, but I also know, I think it's going to be a trilogy and the 3rd book isn't out yet. So if that's something that's going to frustrate you, maybe hold off a minute. For the book that you pushed most people to read, I guess that's for you to say. I don't know which book most people have been encouraged to read based on my recommendation. However, I will tell you the book that I've been recommending the most, and that is Snow Glass Apples by Neil Gaiman and Colleen Doran. I think I've bought multiple copies of this book this year because I just think it's something that has a little something for everyone in it. It's very much for adults. Under no circumstances, despite this being a fairy tale, is this for children. It is sexually explicit, I think, basically from page 1, but it is sexually explicit, but it's such a dark, clever retelling of Snow White, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it was a perfect balm after reading The Sleeper and the Spindle and being so disappointed by it. The next question we've got is best series that you started in 2021, and that is going to be the Wayward Children series. I absolutely love these books. They are so comforting. Every single one of them has queer characters, some description, at least I think so. But regardless, the author is queer, and they all take place around various different portal fantasies and revolve around children who end up in different worlds that seem perfectly catered to their wants and needs, and then they end up having to return back to their previous life. And I think there's such an insightful look into the variety of traumas that people can experience, but also adjusting to life not being quite how you planned. There's a lot of really comforting moments to them, but they do hit on some heavier topics as well. And I think that's part of what I really enjoyed about them. And as for the best series ending, we have Redempter by Jordan Ifueko. This is the second book in a duology, the first being Raybearer, and it brilliantly picked up on where we left off at the end of Raybearer, and I felt like it didn't brush over potential traumas. I also thought that it dealt really well with things like queer identities. It has a beautiful found family. This duology starts with a young girl who is told by her mother that she will meet this boy, and once he falls in love with her, she will kill him. Her journey basically goes on from there. There's a lot to the story. And as I say, it's got a brilliant found family to it. There's magic. There's fantastical creatures. I really, really enjoyed this duology, and I'm likely to return to it again and again, basically for the rest of my life, I imagine. And I'm very excited to see what this author does next as well. For most unputdownable, I'm going to say it was American King by Sierra Simone. This is the third book in the New Camelot trilogy, which I know there's now subsequent books in the series, but this rounds out the primary first arc of the story. I was just so gripped by everything that was happening. There's so much melodrama to it. But also it's quite interesting because I thought I'd spoilt myself for the story, and then it turns out I hadn't actually spoilt myself. So that also added to the appeal of this story for me. The next question asks for my favourite quote of the year. And I found this really difficult, partially because I'm really bad at making a note of quotes that I enjoy. Hopefully I'll try and do better this year. But there's a line in Build Your House Around My Body by Violet Coppersmith that I very much enjoyed. Out of context, it probably doesn't do very much for you, but the line is, "You got away, Winnie, but if you hadn't, I would find them for you and we would tear them apart together." I think it's one of those quotes that in context would make a lot more sense, but right at that moment in the story, it was so incredibly powerful, and I absolutely adored it. It was one of the things that made this book for me, if I'm honest. The next question is book that you wish you'd picked up sooner, and that is Zenny, A Marriage of Inconvenience by Rebecca Weatherspoon. I use Scribd for a lot of my audiobooks, and I feel like Zenny is one that has been pushed to me quite a lot. I think it's been pushed to a lot of people, but I could be wrong, and also it could be to do with my reading tastes. But I didn't pick it up for a while. I think partially the cover seemed like something I wouldn't enjoy, but when I eventually did pick it up, I really, really enjoyed it. And part of that was the fact that both the protagonist and the love interest are queer. And that is something I love, especially because I didn't see it anywhere in the description. So it was just something that they were, rather than trying to be a selling point for the book. The book that I'm most likely to reread in 2022 is probably a little bit not that exciting, but it's A Song of Wraiths and Ruin by Roseanne A. Brown, and that's because the sequel has just come out, and I feel like I'll get a lot more out of the story if I read the first book in the duology first. My favourite newly discovered author would have to be Tiffany McDaniel. I picked up The Summer That Melted Everything back in October. It's a story about a lawyer who writes a letter and puts it in the local paper, inviting the devil to come to their small town. And when the devil turns up, he turns out to be a young boy called Sal. So everyone immediately thinks that he is a runaway. But then a sequence of events happen that starts people thinking that perhaps he is actually the devil. It's a really heartfelt story that delves into a lot of very difficult things, but it's written in such an engaging way that you can't help but be completely absorbed with the story and desperate to know what happened. My favourite cover of the year, and again this was a really difficult one to pick, but I ended up going for The Goblins of Bellwater by Molly Ringwald. As you can see, it is very beautiful. For the book that made me cry the most, I did almost put A Little Life on this list, and then I remembered about this book. and it is Forever Ends on Friday by Justin A. Reynolds. This is a book that I'm not going to tell you what it's about because I read it knowing nothing about it and it broke me. I started crying probably before even the halfway mark, and I think I cried for the whole of the book. I was laughing at the same time, but it was very much one of those where both emotions were happening at the same time, and it was such an intense book for me to read. For a book that made you laugh the most, this one was really hard for probably the opposite reason of a lot of books, in that I don't read a lot of funny books. But in the end, I went for The Venue by Tj Payne. This was pitched to me as Battle Royale, but at a wedding. And I somewhat agree with that description. It's very on the nose, and it's not trying to be anything other than quite ridiculous, but in the best way. I really, really enjoyed it. I especially enjoyed the way that it ended, and it does make me want to pick up more from this author. For favourite reread of the year, I am going to go with Cirque du Freak by Darren Shan. I don't actually have just Cirque du Freak. I have the Vampire Blood trilogy, which, as you can see, I've only made it through Cirque du Freak. But as you can also see, I've been annotating it. And I really enjoyed that experience, and I plan on continuing my reread this year. This is potentially my favourite series of all time. However, I am in the process of a reread, so part of that is going to be seeing how well this book aged. My most surprising 5-star read of the year has to be Detransition Baby by Tory Peters. I picked this up for the video where I read the debut novel nominees for the Goodreads Choice Award last year. And I started off not convinced by this book. I thought it had a brilliant premise. It features a trans woman called Reese, a character called Ames who was a trans woman but then detransitioned, and it features a Chinese American woman called Katrina. And basically Ames manages to get Katrina pregnant and then has this crazy idea to co-parent the baby with Reese. It is an absolutely fantastic concept. I did find it very lit fic to start off with. It came across a little bit pretentious, for want of a better word, but it had some really brilliant conversations about identity and what it means to detransition. And I also really appreciated the ending that we got. So highly recommend it. If it does feel like it's a little pretentious, then stick with it because it is a very enjoyable read. For hidden gem of the year, this one possibly isn't too hidden, but I'm going to say The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois by Honoré Fanon Jeffers. This is a book that was in the top 20 debut novel category for the Goodreads Choice Awards. But the discourse around that book when the awards were nominated was very much that people hadn't read the book, they'd heard brilliant things about it, but they were intimidated by the length. I know that this book isn't out in the UK until the end of this month, I believe. So I don't know if it's going to be one of those books that has a lot more buzz once it's out a lot more widely. But at least in the latter part of 2021, people were saying they'd heard good things, but that they hadn't read it. And I think it is one of those books, a little bit like A Little Life or even War and Peace, where if you actually stick with it and read it, it is well worth it, but it can be a little bit intimidating when you see how long it is to just pick it up in the first place. For a book that made you mad, the caveat being that doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't like it, just, made you feel those emotions, I would have to say it's Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This is a book that the author talks about Indigenous teachings and what can be learned from those teachings. But specifically, the point that made me so mad was when she was talking about the language that her nation spoke, and that there were, I think it's something very low, like 9 fluent speakers still alive today, and the youngest of them, I think, is in their 70s. So it's a language that, through the practice of the residential schools, potentially will end up going extinct. And you can't help but feel furious at the impact that our ancestors had in colonizing America and trying to get rid of these cultures. Honestly, where do I go from here? The next few questions are related specifically to my channel. I do also have a Bookstagram, but that somewhat fell to the wayside, so these are just going to relate to this channel here. And the first question is favourite video that I made. Looking back through all the videos that I made in 2021, I think the favourite video that I made was actually the vlog where I turned, the vlog of the week where I turned 30. I discovered that I really enjoy having these little capsules of time where I can look back and it's not just my very faulty memory. I can actually see, and through like the music and obviously visually seeing it, I can experience these times again as if for the first time. And I really, really enjoyed the experience of putting that video together and then being able to experience it all over again whenever I want. The most popular video I made last year is my complete Discworld collector's library. It's a very simple video. It's literally every single one of my Discworld collector's library books on a turntable with a simple instrumental track in the background and blurbs of the books, and people seem to like it, which I'm very happy about. Video that you wish got more love, and for that I'm going to say the book where I read the debut novels in the Goodreads Choice Awards 2021. I did put a lot of work into reading the books, and I don't feel like it was a waste of effort because I discovered some books that I absolutely adored. I discovered authors that I'm looking forward to reading more from in the future. But it does make me a little bit sad that it didn't get a little bit more love, but I also appreciate that it was a very long video, and especially if you don't know me, you're not necessarily going to be interested in watching that, and that is perfectly fine. Favourite bookish discovery for last year, hands down, is Billy Helen Creations on Etsy. She makes hand-painted bookmarks and you can get them laminated. They are absolutely gorgeous and they are all hand-painted. And also, if you should definitely follow her on Instagram as well, because she's just good people, basically. My most anticipated 2022 release is Gallant by V. Schwab. I don't know much about it. I don't need to know much about it. It's by V. Schwab. I'm excited to read it. A 2022 release you've already read and recommend, 100% Where the Drowned Girls Go by Shauna Maguire. It is the only Wayward Children book so far I've read that has gotten a full 5 stars from me. That's not to say the other books weren't exceptional, but it is very much a 5-star read and I highly, highly recommend. And finally, if you could prioritise one book that you need to read in 2022, I will have a video of my 5 priority books for 2022, but the one book that I absolutely 100% need to read this year, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V. Schwab. I own, I think, 6 copies of this book because, well, she is possibly my favourite author, and every single edition that they release is stunningly beautiful. But also, I think I'm going to love it, so I just need to pull my finger out and actually read it. Tomorrow should be a lot more like quantitative data, as I will be doing reading stats, and keep your eyes peeled because I am putting out a video each day this fortnight just to kind of wrap up my 2021 and start off my 2022 reading. So until tomorrow, bye!
There's a place